From the ashes of the Civil War, America emerged forever changed, propelled onto the world stage through global conflict and ideological rivalry. The Spanish-American War marked its imperial ambitions, while two world wars forged the United States into a superpower. The Cold War era brought nuclear brinkmanship and proxy battles, with the Berlin Wall standing as a stark symbol of division. Ultimately, the collapse of the Soviet Union ended an era, but the legacy of these struggles continues to shape our world today. Section 1. Echoes of Division, the Civil War and its Aftermath. The American Civil War, 1861 to 1865, was the bloodiest conflict on American soil, setting the stage for the nation's transformation into a global power. While the Civil War primarily focused on the issues of slavery and states' rights, its consequences extended far beyond emancipation. The war solidified federal authority over the states, strengthened the U.S. military, and laid the groundwork for America's future interventionism. Reconstruction, 1865 to 1877, attempted to reunite the country, but persistent racial divisions, economic disparities, and political tensions endured. As the 19th century closed, the United States prepared to assert itself on the world stage. Section 2. Global conflict unfolds. Spanish-American War, World War I, and World War II. The Spanish-American War, 1898, marked America's debut as an imperial power. The destruction of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor triggered a conflict that resulted in swift victories for the U.S. across the Caribbean and the Pacific. In the Treaty of Paris, Spain ceded territories including Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines to the United States, establishing a new American presence overseas. World War I, 1914 and 1918, initially saw American neutrality. However, the sinking of the Lusitania, Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare, and the Zimmermann telegram proposing a German-Mexican alliance compelled President Wilson to enter the war in 1917. U.S. troops, known as doughboys, provided the fresh manpower and industrial support necessary for an Allied victory. Wilson's vision for a League of Nations laid the seeds for future international diplomacy, although isolationist sentiments led the U.S. Senate to reject membership. The interwar period, plagued by economic turmoil and the rise of authoritarian regimes, culminated in World War II. The attack on Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941, galvanized American public opinion and brought the U.S. into a global conflict on two fronts, Europe and the Pacific. America became the arsenal of democracy, supplying allies with military equipment through programs like Lend-Lease before fully committing troops. Victories at Normandy, D-Day 1944, and in the Pacific, at battles such as Midway and Okinawa, paved the way for Axis defeat. The Manhattan Project's success led to atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, ending the war but ushering in the atomic age. Section 3. The Korean War and the Vietnam War. The ideological battle between communism and capitalism ignited the Korean War, 1950 to 1953. After World War II, Korea had been divided along the 38th parallel. When North Korean forces crossed into the South, the United States, under United Nations auspices, intervened. General Douglas MacArthur's daring Incheon landing turned the tide, but Chinese intervention prolonged the conflict. A grueling stalemate led to an armistice in 1953, leaving the peninsula divided, a division that persists today. The Vietnam War escalated American involvement in Southeast Asia. Initially advisory, U.S. engagement deepened following the Gulf of Tonkin incident, 1964, which granted President Johnson broad military powers. The war became a quagmire, marked by brutal guerrilla warfare, massive casualties, and widespread domestic opposition. The Tet Offensive, 1968, revealed the fragility of American progress. Despite military victories, public trust eroded, leading to U.S. withdrawal under the Paris Peace Accords, 1973. 2 years later, Saigon fell to communist forces. Vietnam left deep scars on the American psyche, leading to a more cautious foreign policy known as the Vietnam Syndrome. Section 3. The Korean War and the Vietnam War. The ideological battle between communism and capitalism ignited the Korean War, 1950 to 1953. After World War II, Korea had been divided along the 38th parallel. When North Korean forces crossed into the South, the United States, under United Nations auspices, intervened. General Douglas MacArthur's daring Incheon landing turned the tide, but Chinese intervention prolonged the conflict. A grueling stalemate led to an armistice in 1953, leaving the peninsula divided. A division that persists today. The Vietnam War escalated American involvement in Southeast Asia. Initially advisory, U.S. engagement deepened following the Gulf of Tonkin incident, 1964, which granted President Johnson broad military powers. The war became a quagmire marked by brutal guerrilla warfare, massive casualties, and widespread domestic opposition. The Tet Offensive, 1968, revealed the fragility of American progress. Despite military victories, public trust eroded, leading to U.S. withdrawal under the Paris Peace Accords, 1973. 2 years later, Saigon fell to communist forces. Vietnam left deep scars on the American psyche, leading to a more cautious foreign policy known as the Vietnam Syndrome. Section 4. Nuclear arms race and Cold War tensions. The conclusion of World War II saw a rapid arms buildup. The Soviet Union's successful atomic bomb test in 1949 ended the U.S. monopoly. By the 1950s, both powers developed hydrogen bombs, capable of far greater destruction. Key nuclear milestones included the Limited Test Ban Treaty, 1963. In response to environmental concerns and the Cuban Missile Crisis, this treaty banned nuclear testing in the atmosphere, outer space, and underwater. SALT I, 1972. Signed by Nixon and Brezhnev, it limited the number of nuclear missile launchers and introduced anti-ballistic missile (ABM) treaties, slowing the arms race. SALT II, 1979. Negotiated under Carter, this treaty aimed to reduce strategic weapons further. Though not ratified due to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, both sides observed its terms informally. The specter of mutually assured destruction, MAD, kept direct conflict between superpowers at bay, but proxy wars raged in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. Espionage, propaganda, and technological competition, e.g., the space race, became critical battlegrounds. The Cuban Missile Crisis, 1962, was the closest the world came to nuclear war. Soviet missiles in Cuba triggered a U.S. naval blockade. After tense negotiations, Khrushchev agreed to withdraw the missiles in exchange for a U.S. promise not to invade Cuba and the secret removal of American missiles from Turkey. Section 5. The Berlin Wall and the End of an Era. In 1961, the construction of the Berlin Wall starkly divided East and West Berlin, symbolizing the broader East-West schism. Families were torn apart. Would-be defectors risked their lives to cross into the West. The wall stood as a physical manifestation of the Iron Curtain. Presidents Kennedy and Reagan made iconic speeches at the wall. Kennedy's Ich bin ein Berliner Adrepides, 1963, reinforced American support for West Berlin. In 1987, Reagan's exhortation to Mr. Gorbachev, "Tear down this wall," became a rallying cry for freedom. By the late 1980s, the Soviet Union faced mounting internal crises, economic stagnation, the failed war in Afghanistan, and growing demands for reform. Mikhail Gorbachev's policies of glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring, signaled a loosening grip. Mass protests in Eastern Europe, combined with diplomatic pressures and Gorbachev's refusal to use force, led to rapid changes. On November 9, 1989, the Berlin Wall fell, heralding the collapse of communist regimes across Europe and the end of the Cold War by 1991. Section 6. The rise of détente and the collapse of the Soviet Union. Following the Cuban Missile Crisis, the concept of détente, a relaxing of tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union, emerged in the 1970s. Diplomatic efforts, including Nixon's historic visit to Moscow and the signing of arms limitation agreements like SALT I, fostered hope for a more stable global environment. Trade agreements and cultural exchanges became instruments of soft diplomacy. However, détente unraveled by the late 1970s. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 reignited Cold War hostilities. The U.S. response included economic sanctions, a boycott of the 1980 Moscow Olympics, and a renewed military buildup under President Reagan. Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, or Star Wars, aimed to develop missile defense systems, further pressuring the already strained Soviet economy. Simultaneously, nationalist movements surged across Eastern Europe. Solidarity, an independent trade union in Poland, led by Lech Wałęsa, challenged communist authority and inspired other uprisings. Gorbachev's reforms, while intended to modernize socialism, only accelerated its collapse. By 1991, the Soviet Union disintegrated into 15 independent republics. The Cold War ended not with a cataclysmic conflict, but through economic exhaustion, political liberalization, and the irrepressible desire for freedom among its people. The post-Cold War world introduced new challenges: ethnic conflicts, terrorism, and emerging powers like China. Yet it also opened the door to unprecedented globalization, cooperation, and technological advancement. Conclusion: a new world order. The century from the Civil War to the Cold War reshaped the world. America evolved from a fractured republic into a global superpower. Wars fought on distant shores, nuclear brinkmanship, and ideological battles between East and West defined the modern era.